Alison Hargreaves, Mountain Climber, Daredevils, Lesson 20. Some people called her brave, others called her reckless, and still others called her downright irresponsible. No one ever called Alison Hargreaves timid. As one of the very best mountain climbers in the world, Hargreaves took on challenges few others dared tackle. Given the dangers involved, it was not totally surprising when her work led her to an early death. Hargreaves grew up in England, the daughter of two mathematicians. Her parents hoped she would follow in their footsteps. Hargreaves had different ambitions. She didn't want an academic career. She wanted a life that would push her to the limits of her physical and mental abilities. Such a life was best found at the tops of the highest mountains in the world. At the age of 18, Hargreaves left school to become a professional climber. Several years later, she married fellow climber Jim Ballard. In 1988, she achieved one of her longtime goals by climbing the north face of Mount Elger, one of the highest mountains in the Alps. While most climbers are congratulated for an achievement, Hargreaves was criticized. That's because she was 5 months pregnant with her first child when she made the climb. People accused her of putting herself and the baby at risk. Hargreaves responded indignantly to such comments. "What kind of mother would I be if I sacrificed climbing for my children?" she asked. "It's what makes me me, and what makes me the good mother that I am." Even after her second child was born, Hargreaves kept climbing. In 1993, she set her sights on a new goal, to become the first person ever to climb the 6 highest mountains in the Alps in one season. That meant going up Mount Elger once again, as well as tackling the fearsome Matterhorn. Hargreaves' plan was not only a dangerous proposition, it was also expensive. Alison had trouble finding sponsors to cover the costs. Still, she was determined to find a way. At last, she and her husband sold their house in England and moved to Switzerland. They used money from the sale of the house to finance the expeditions. And in the meantime, the family lived out of the back of an old Land Rover, a sports utility vehicle. Hargreaves accomplished her goal that year, reaching all 6 summits. She wasn't finished yet. 2 years later, she turned her attention to the Himalayas. She wanted to climb 3 of the toughest peaks that mountain range had to offer, again doing it in a single season. The first would be Everest, the tallest mountain in the world. The second would be K2, the world's second highest mountain. And the last would be India's Mount Kanchenjunga. Saying goodbye to her children Tom, age 6, Kate, age 4, Hargreaves headed off on her quest. In May of that year, she sent back triumphant news. She had just become the first woman in history to make it to the top of Everest alone and without oxygen. Only one other person had ever done this before. Most climbers, even the very best one, use oxygen tanks to supplement the thin air at Everest summit. Most also employ Sherpa guides to carry their equipment. Hargreaves, however, reached the 29,028-foot summit unaided. Suddenly, she was the most talked-about climber in the world. Hargreaves had no intention of sitting back and enjoying the glory, however. She wanted to push on with her plan. She returned home for a 2-week stay with her husband and children. Then she flew back to the Himalayas to begin her ascent of K2. K2 is known as Killer Mountain, for good reason. 1 in 3 climbers who attack its summit ends up dead. The odds for K2 are even worse than for Mount Everest. 1 in 10 climbers perishes. What makes K2 so treacherous is its very steep slope and the ferocity and frequency of the storms that sweep over it. Hargreaves knew the risks. She wasn't frightened by them. "There is no gain without risk," she said simply. Besides, Hargreaves honestly thought she could handle the mountain. "If I thought it was desperately dangerous," she told a reporter, "I wouldn't do it." Instead, she believed she had the strength, stamina, and skill to conquer K2. Such an attitude was typical of Hargreaves, said veteran climber Thor Kaiser. Alison was extremely intense and independent, a very aggressive person on and off the mountain. After climbing up the lower part of K2, Hargreaves and her climbing partners set up base camp high on the mountain. From that location, they would try to reach the summit. Again and again, they set out. Each time, the weather conditions deteriorated. Each time, Hargreaves and the others were forced to turn back before reaching the top. After almost 2 months of frustration, Hargreaves was ready to call it quits. It was getting late in the season. Winter would be moving in. Storms would grow even worse. At the last minute, however, Hargreaves decided to make one more attempt. August 13, she and 9 other climbers left camp determined to get to the summit. Once again, however, heavy winds kicked up. 4 climbers, including Peter Hillary, son of famous climber Sir Edmund Hillary, turned back. Hargreaves and 5 others continued on. Later that day, Hargreaves radioed the base camp with wonderful news. She had reached the top of K2. As she and her climbing partners headed down, the winds grew worse. Within an hour, a full-scale blizzard formed. The already frigid temperatures dropped even lower. The group had no way of sheltering themselves. They had no choice but to keep moving. Back at the base camp, people waited for Hargreaves and the others to arrive. As time passed, they sensed something had gone very wrong. Indeed, Alison Hargreaves, the 5